Welcome, everybody, to the B2B Community Builder Show. I'm your host and Chief Executive Connector, Pablo Gonzalez, and I'm super pumped for our guest today, who is the father of the H2H, human-to-human movement, very successful marketing agency, entrepreneur, had a incredible insight that went kind of viral for him, has had TED Talks, world-renowned author, and right now I feel like he is evolving into, this new evolution of where the world is headed, and has a really, really important message about trust and where it's going. World-renowned speaker, marketing strategist, soon to be European resident, Bryan Kramer. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks. Thank you so much for having me here. And I appreciate the warm welcome.
Yeah, man. It's kind of my thing to do like a hype man intro. With that being said, community show. We want you contributing in the chat. We want you popping into the Q&A. Be a part of the conversation. In an hour, we go into the relationship-driven growth open mic sesh where we'll bring everybody up on stage and we'll have an open conversation. But for right now, I want to welcome my friend Kim, who is also pioneering a solution in the world of trust, building trust. We got Pratiti, my friend Pratiti, who's here. She is a coach, a realtor, doing some really interesting things with women events. And we got Laura and Nancy in the house. Good to have you both here. Let's get right into it, Bryan. As I did a whole bunch of research on you, and of course, the H2H thing is one of these things that's like become synonymous with anybody that is smart about business. I haven't found a lot on these new findings that you have around trust and where it's all going. Can you tell me what your big aha moment was of really keying into the need for trust in today's world?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest thing around trust right now is that there's so much distrust. So that's what keep me into it. It's never been as low as it is right now in our time, in our lives currently living. And I think that it'll get worse before it gets better, but it will get better. And I think that we go through periods of time where we have to create more connection with others. We just lost a huge amount of trust just in the pandemic, and a lot of PTSD and a lot of other things that we lost with that too. We've lost trust in our governmental affairs. We've lost trust in brands that promise and don't deliver. We've lost trust in even just within companies, employees working for companies. Obviously, over the last year, there's huge amounts of layoffs, or people looking, or the mass amount of people that left companies the year before that because they were taking charge of their lives. And so there was a huge exit that way. We've gone through a period of change over the last 2 to 3 years that's unlike anything else that we've ever seen. When you think about that, you think about what was lost during all of that, also what was gained. We had a lot to be gained. I think that when we went through the pandemic, every Buddhist monk looked at each other and said, well, where have you been? This is exactly where we've been. We all get to be present in our lives. So there's that. Yes, there was a lot of bad stuff that happened, but a lot of people also started to, over time, understand that they had more agency over themselves, more agency over their time, more agency over their families and what they wanted to spend. So I think in that, they started to look at things that they trusted and didn't trust, and that started to create a wave. So there's a lot that goes into what's now created the wave of distrust. And I mean, if you look at the barometer report, the trust barometer by Edelman, they measured it and they showed that brands are at the lowest level of trust that have ever been as well. I'm working with them to create this next book that I'm working on. So, that's a huge indicator of where everybody's at and what got me interested in it.
That makes a lot of sense, man. This idea of kind of like looking around, and the pandemic was this like giant eye-opening thing where we kind of all collectively realized, wait a minute, this social contract that I thought we were operating under isn't really serving anybody, right? And therefore we all start asking questions. I wonder, as you started formulating this book and you've realized that all these things are happening, how do you describe the ramifications or like the symptoms of a world that lacks trust? What are the signals that you see that tell you that the root diagnosis here is a lack of trust?
Well, just all the pivotal points, the things that the tips of the tidal waves, if you will, the amount of people that got let go, the way they got let go of companies, when you look at, gosh, Twitter, and, they got let go over a tweet, not over it, or you look at companies that were let go in one big Zoom call that said, you're all gone, today's your last day, from another CEO. Or you look, I mean, how many apology emails did we see over the way things were handled over the last year, or for how they started to realize that their actions were not met in the best way possible, and it hurt their brand. Just that as one leading indicator is enough. But if you want to pile on more, look at I'm not going to go in the government, but if you just look at that as a whole and just where everybody is politically, I don't think that that's the most unified that we've ever been. I think we'd all agree to that and just leave it there. If that's not enough, then you look at what's going on, across the board with us as a consumer of brands, and whether we will trust from a customer service standpoint or from a brand who we're going to buy from. We have never been more fickle and less dedicated to a brand than we've ever been before, because there's so many choices now, and that makes it hard for the brands to stand up and say, we are your only choice, so that take it or leave it. That's not the case anymore. We have a lot of choices, and so that makes us more fickle as a customer. That leads to less trust, and you're gonna have to earn more of it if you want us to stay. So it's everything, man. It's everything.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. It's like the value prop of everything has shifted dramatically. And when I look at, as I was doing my research on your background and your career, it doesn't miss on me this idea that you started your marketing agency in 2002, which is like right at the advent of like social media, right? I think of 2002 when I first figured out MySpace existed. And I have to assume that however we have positioned the value prop to the consumer throughout industrialization to now, I can't imagine a faster rate of change than what it's been over the last 20 years of how you move product, how you reach the consumer, how you communicate. And I think of this like almost industrialization of communication, right? Like we've gone from the door-to-door salesman to the megaphone that reaches the entire world all at once in a very, very short amount of time, which I think you encapsulate very well in the H2H movement, right? Like, and I just want to skip on the surface of that real quick, of the idea that you came up with this framework of simplicity, empathy, imperfection as things that make you more human. Can you tell me about the kind of like what the evolution is of that messaging from H2H to really digging into actual trust as the number one thing?
Yeah, no problem. So let's start with the pillars that you were talking about, and then we'll move into that because it really plays a role. So when you think about those three, you think about what makes a brand, especially now with AI, and I know we'll talk about that, but with the advent of technology, and technology even in 2002, 2010, 2020, as we escalate, it just becomes more and more probable that we're going to try and distance ourselves from engaging with another human being as a business, because it becomes easier to automate and it becomes easier to put technology in place so that we don't have those kinds of discussions that we used to have, where one day, not too long ago, somebody used to come up to my door and try to sell me a vacuum cleaner or Girl Scout cookies. And now everything is online. It's on Instacart, it's on DoorDash, or it's on Costco.com. Everything's a com. And so, we look at all of that and try to automate. That's what we accidentally or forcefully do, whichever side you sit on. And I think that it's important that we take note of that in our automating, in the spaces where we try to create distance, we're actually putting distance into relationships. And that's what is losing trust, because people trust people. They don't trust brands. People trust, when you think about a brand, you don't think about the brand, you think about who's behind the brand. Like with Apple, you might think Tim Cook. And so you assign or align your thinking of that brand with who's running the company. The same thing goes for other brands that are more innovative. And so when you look at now these three pillars, simplicity, let's start with that. What brand do you believe is more simplistic than any other brand?
I mean, I kind of went through the gamut of like thinking about this because I knew you were going to hit me with it. And for me, all three, I'm going to say the same answer for all three, but I think Nike, right? Like I think Nike as like one of the greatest brands of all time. Just do it. Like we stand for athletes, like get going. To me, it's very simple to think of Nike as a very simple brand, simple message, simple branding that I really echo with, and I think is really cool.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And Apple is actually another good one because you think about their brand, what do they offer? How simple is it to buy it? And how simple is it to get customer service? Yeah. They make it easy on all levels, whether you're an Apple person or not. And so then you look at empathy, who embraces empathy, who actually creates empathy for their customer or for their brand. Is that?
Again, I think of Nike when the Colin Kaepernick thing happened, right? Like it was like, we know who our market is. We don't mind driving this like line in the sand because we know that a big genre of our population is hurting and we're going to stand behind this thing. Like I thought it was really clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. That's a good example. That's a really good example. I hadn't heard that one before. Yeah. Another one might be Amazon. I know this doesn't sound like empathy, but when you think about it, it is, because we can all return. Almost everyone has had a good experience. There's always an anomaly, but almost everyone, which is pretty good odds for a giant company like Amazon to not have a challenge returning their product. It's almost like the old days of Nordstrom when you hear about like somebody returned a tire and Nordstrom said, okay, we'll take it. Like that's how much they will bend a knee to say, well, take anything that you want. And that's an empathetic action for their customer. We're not going to argue with you. We're going to make it easy. And because we know you'll come back again and buy from us. Who is
Bryan, if I can pop in here, because I think these two have something that are very simple to me, not simple, but like that have a common thread here, which is making it easy on me, right? Like I think simplicity, allowing for the brain to like understand it easily, empathy, allowing for an experience, like thinking of me first. I think that's very clear in both of those, right? And that like in the Apple example, in the Amazon example, I hadn't thought of both of those in the sense of like, man, reduce friction, right? Like reduce friction from a personal level. I always think, how can I make it easy for you to deal with me is always a winning formula. And I feel like that is a very human thing, right? Like if you make it easy for me, I'm more likely to do business with you. And those two parts really stand out to me.
Absolutely. Reduce the friction, increase the loyalty.
100%.
Absolutely. 100%. And, credit cards are notorious for trying to reduce friction. And
I love Amex because
right?
Right?
Yeah. And then what does Apple come and do? They made their phone credit card friendly so that you could reduce the friction with the wallet, and now Google and everybody else. So, reducing friction and looking at a friction list. I love, what are the frictions, and let's list them all and then let's reduce it. That's a great activity that I think every company should go through. And then the last one is imperfection. Who embraces imperfection?
That one's a little bit harder, right? I think the first thing that comes to mind is VW kind of like saying, hey, we made this big mess up with the diesel thing. So now let us make it right. And let us try to be the greenest vehicle company of all time is kind of the first one that comes to mind there.
That's a great answer. Yeah. Again, another one I haven't heard. You're doing really well. You're scoring. I usually hear more typical answers. So this is great. And I'd love to hear from all of you who are listening, what you think of these. Like what brands are you seeing in each of these categories, especially in imperfection, simplicity, and empathy? In the imperfection side, you might look at like maybe a company like Dove, who embraces the imperfection of skin. In all of their advertising and messaging, we embrace all of humanity, but not just humanity. Look at what our products are going to do, not just for the environment, but also for different skin color, and then you look at brands that aren't that are not embracing imperfection. And when they mess up and they don't acknowledge it, then we again become a non-loyal customer. And now we're often running to the races. We're fickle when we see that happen. So in all three, I think you were saying Nike, you see Nike.
Well, no, I don't know. I couldn't think of imperfection in Nike, but to your point, I feel like Southwest, who is this brand that had done the first two things so well, had a giant opportunity to embrace it,
didn't they?
Do it, and it's cost them dearly.
Totally. Yeah. Can you imagine if they struck all three where they may still correct it, so they've done a good job with now, but were they a little too late at bat? Time will tell. I don't know. I know that I know who is not all three, and hopefully sometimes I tend to need to keep my opinions to myself, but I'm going to say it straight out, is Facebook. Facebook is not simple. They don't appear to be empathetic for the customer. And I also would say that when imperfection happens, like, I don't know, spending on $2+ billion on VR and then just switching and saying, now we're all about AI, but not owning the loss or owning that to the 8,000 people that you just let go and saying it's that kind of stuff doesn't really want you to embrace the brand. And, and so that's where the opportunity is in trust. And that's why I say and I know you asked me this and I'm long answer, but when you look at all out of these three things, what you get by not having those three is distrust. And so that it is the fourth ingredient to embracing simplicity, empathy, and imperfection. And then you have trust. So that is where I'm excited, because there is a way to create it and there's a way to get it back. And that is through transparency, being transparent about what you have done, what you're doing, where your errors are. And then finally, within transparency, said it 10 times, is vulnerability. Vulnerability as humans, vulnerability as a company, vulnerability in truth and telling the truth, whether you want to or not. Oh, Patagonia is a great one, especially I saw that pop up. Sorry.
Lori's going to come up with more stuff throughout the show, so I've already got to get used to it.
Oh yeah, Patagonia has just killed it when it comes to that. But anyway, that's where trust comes in. I know you asked me that at the very beginning as a question, but that's how that comes into play.
I love it, man. I appreciate the back and forth. And I think Lori brought up, even before Patagonia, a good point of, she's bringing up Twitter. And I would kick it back to even say the juxtaposition between our view of Mark Zuckerberg post data scandal and all that stuff, like we had lost trust in him, and yet we still held Elon up as a hero. And now as Elon has come in and gone beyond this thing, like what he did at Tesla, which was very transparent, very much empathy, like very much like for their clients and built in public, opening up imperfections. He's doing the opposite in Twitter, right? Like he's kind of just like not being very clear of like where it's going, not, kind of doing these like very non-empathetic moves with each other. And it feels like it's cost him dearly, right? Like he went from like being everybody's favorite, like super genius, to now people thinking he's a super villain, and it happens real quick.
It does. It's the Will Smith effect. I think that you can gain it and you can lose it. You can lose it quicker than you can gain it. It takes a while to gain it. It takes a split second to lose it. That's the Will Smith effect. I just made that up, but
I love it.
I think, because you're right. He did grow this and do this much differently than he did with Tesla. Now, the difference is that I think that Twitter is a different animal than he's trying to take on something that has never, well, you might say the cars have never been done before either, but this is very public and it's a very public platform. And for him to take it in that direction, the billionaire old guy who owns Geico, and yes, he came out saying that he thinks the guy's brilliant, but he'd never take on Twitter to do what he's done. So is he somebody that we're rooting for, or is he somebody that we're going, no way, this is never going to work? I think everybody's split decision, or at least a lot of people are split decision going, I don't know. I don't really, and to be honest, I don't know like where he's going to go, but I do know that a lot of it lost my trust on what I thought, Twitter was all about. He is now the decision maker, at least appears to be, on tweets he doesn't want to keep up and tweets he does want to keep up. There's not a lot of trust in the medium and the information that's on there. And so playing God does not bear well to equaling trust.
Yeah, man. I can tell you that as a household, we are rabid environmentalists. And up until very recently, I was all in on him. And now it's a conversation with my wife and I, right? Like, it's a little bit more complicated, man. But I don't want to, this isn't the Elon show. I want to get into these like 5 shifts of trust that you talk about, right? You talked about transparency and vulnerability. Are those 2 of them, or kind of talk me through your 5 shifts of trust framework?
Well, transparency is one of them. Then the other one is credibility. Credibility is how much we have built in goodwill around both ourselves and others. And when, I think Bezos said it best, your brand is what people say when you're not in the room. That's your credibility. And so if you've built goodwill with others and they're saying what you hope they would say versus what you hope they don't say, that's your credibility. And that's when people are going to start to trust you. In order to have credibility, you have to have reliability. You have to be a reliable person. That means that consistency within reliability, consistently reliable. You're going to do what you say you're going to do. And when you fall short, you're going to own it. And that's part of the imperfection. The next one is intimacy. And this is a part of the vulnerability part. Intimacy, I like to call it into me, you see. This is where you're allowing others to see inward and see more than you normally would. You see this a lot with startups where they growth hack by showing people the insides of the growth that they're going through. Like, here are our numbers. Some people will actually post their balance sheet. Some people will post their month over month results. I've seen some people share what the challenges were that last month and what we're correcting to move forward into next month, and almost treating everybody like an owner of the company, and so on and so on. And then the last one is self. This is trusting in yourself. So, and this is maybe the most important one, and it's where I see most people fall down, where we don't trust ourselves, but we trust other things. And I believe it all starts with self. You have to trust yourself first before you can trust others. That's the most important piece to this whole thing. Trust starts with you. It starts inside and it moves to the outside. And a lot of times we don't trust ourselves. Like, for instance, get up and speak. What if I mess up? What if I get on this podcast and I say the wrong thing about Elon Musk and somebody doesn't like me for it? What if I, start this company and I don't make the money that I think I'm going to make because I say the wrong thing and I'm not a leader and I can't do that? Trust in self is where it starts to know that you can do this. You got this. You are enough. And everything else in credibility will be built around that self-trust. Your reliability of showing up every time will create more trust. And you have to trust yourself with that. And showing people inside, being more vulnerable around where you're coming from, is going to build that trust. So when you add those 4 things together, you will not fail, I promise.
Man, you're speaking straight to me here. Because if I'll start, since self and trusting yourself is the most important one. Let's start there. I very recently, 2022 was like the year that I figured out that many of my shortcomings come from a odd relationship with self-worth, right? And those things, to me, the outward signs of it, the thing that I was trying to cure from myself, that led me to understanding the self-worth thing, was, how do I become more consistent? Right? Like, how do I show up more often and not drop the ball? Right? Like, I essentially was trying to fix for what I titled as like work ethic issues that I had. And what I ended up discovering was this idea that it's like, I need to trust in myself instead of thinking that somebody's going to do stuff for me. that somebody has to save me or somebody has to rescue me for something. Until I got to that, I really had problems showing up for my team, showing up for my clients at the level that I really, really wanted to. And for me, having gone through that journey, it makes a lot. And obviously, I echo with you and I think with a very similar lens here. But I wonder from your perspective, right? Like you work with these like very big companies. What does that trust and self look like inside of a big company, like as opposed to, small time entrepreneur out here with a team of 12? Like, talk to me how you talk to companies about that, like self-trust piece.
Well, I think it's harder in a company than it is in a nimble, smaller company.
Sure.
And so there's more distrust there than there is in a smaller company because you have more chances for more social dynamics. And there's a lot that has to be put in place into the culture that's going to shape trust. And the culture, culture, you've heard this saying before, I didn't say it, culture eats strategy for lunch. If the culture isn't right, the company's strategy is not going to be right. You have to build for culture. And, we can point to all kinds of companies that didn't do well because the culture didn't do well. And that's the most important thing that you have to shape. And so how do you shape the leadership? And I'm never really a top-down kind of guy. I always say build from the bottom up. But when it comes to culture, it does come from the top down. Culture is what your leadership is saying that what are we about? And the most important thing, I don't care if you're small, medium, or large, is the impact that we all want to make together. What is the ultimate impact? Not the outcome, the impact. And there's a difference between the two. An outcome is an actual thing that is completed. An impact is how people feel. How do we want people to feel out of our companies, what we produce as a company? So if you can create an impact statement, I believe, for me, that being human is everyone's competitive advantage. And by doing so, people are going to connect and care more. I believe also that when people create impact statements for them, they can also align their team around what they want their impact to be and now move forward together. I doubt very much that there's an impact statement at Twitter right now. I highly doubt that there's an impact statement at Facebook right now. I believe there's an impact statement at other brands that we like and trust, like Apple and like Microsoft. And so when we look at these different organizations, we can quickly see why some are working so well and why others aren't. It's because they're in more alignment with the impact they want to make in the world.
Yeah, totally agree. And I don't know why my head keeps going to this idea that OpenAI, as much as we're here talking about AI, but OpenAI as a company clearly has an impact statement, right? Like they're clearly a company that's on a mission, and we're not really sitting here vilifying them as a company as much as like doubting this AI thing, right? So this like separation of like who's able to kind of do this, the companies that have this mission, this impact thing that they're all on the same page of, right? This very clear knowing of what bus they're on, what the destination of the bus is, right? So you can know if you're on the right seat. It reminds me of a couple of my friends that I have here that are here, right? Like Bree is a part of a company called Refine Labs that created this employer kind of like handbook that popularized it throughout all of LinkedIn. Like they put a lot of work into this employee manifesto and culture and a podcast called The Talent Destination. And my friend Kim, who's here, also is working with a company called Daily Human that's trying to solve for the trust problem, where they are creating these like exchange of prompts between teammates that work remotely in order to get to know each other and create this like transparency and trust in themselves, right? So like I love that the most important thing here that we're talking about when it comes to outward trust is the interior culture and how you do that piece, right? Like that was another big aha moment for me end of 2021. That's like, you can't have outward community without an interior community.
Absolutely. And community is the key there. I love that you use that word community because that's the most important thing moving forward. Social media screwed up community. Every platform that I've seen that came along, and it created a whirlwind for all of us. I mean, you saw what it did, and not one company got it right when it came to community. Not one company. I believe that it's actually built on addiction and on endorphins. And so when we look at those things, they aren't long lasting. We tend to ride them for a while, and just like the ocean, the wave dies and we have to ride a new wave, and we have to look for the next wave. And that's what keeps happening over and over again with different social media platforms. Now, some waves are bigger than others and they stick around longer, but no one has solved for the one thing: community. How do we actually build community within our company? That is a position in some companies that is the most important position that they hired at the company. Not to say that the CFO doesn't have a hard job, but it is the most important, because when you build community, you build connection. When you build connection, you build all of these other things, and people want to stick around because they feel like they're being heard. And now we have a chance of actually doing better. We can build our product in a different direction we know they want to use. And we've said that for years. It's just that community is the way forward. And and the technology makes it possible now. So let's start building more for community and less for what is going to make us more money.
I love it, man. I love it. I echo with you on this wholeheartedly. And I 100% agree with you that technology has put the spotlight on the wrong part of what community is, right? Like I kind of like equate it back to my old days in the green building industry. When you're building a truly sustainable building, you build a very efficient building that has really high indoor air quality, does not waste a lot of materials. It's going to withstand the test of time. And then you put solar panels on top, and you don't need that many solar panels because you built a really good building, but everybody thinks the solar panel is what makes it green, right? So like, I feel like the technology piece has become like, hey, how many people do you have in your Facebook group? That's your community, but it's not. It's something that you described in a podcast I listened to in preparing for this. You said this really astutely. This idea that the way that you build community is how you create a space where people can promote themselves through it. And it doesn't become about you, it becomes about them. Can you kind of like elaborate on that belief?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you almost said it better than I think I could restate it. But I think that, what I was talking about there is that when we help others, it's kind of the give concept. When we give not to get, but we give to give. And, it's very much like money. Money is one of these things where, and I struggled with this, the first half of my life, where I thought money was a thing that I needed to receive or to give, and mostly to receive so that I could be able to create more of it. But what I didn't realize is that money is energy, and the energy behind it is how I'm putting myself out into the world. And there's a difference, and there's a great book called Happy Money that talks about this too. And that's the way that we receive that money, or the way that we spend our money. Am I putting money into my credit cards? That's unhappy money. Am I putting money into others and to grow their education, or to help others in some way that feels good to me? That's happy money. So when we take in happy money because we're earning it out of something that we truly love, that we have so much joy for, or we're spending it on things that we truly love, or that we know is going to go into something that's totally beneficial, whether we give it away or pay somebody, that's happy money. The same thing goes for what you're talking about, where you build a community of people, where you build happy people, and you put them before you put yourselves. So it's not, how do I just build my product and tell us how do we create more for our company, and how do I do this and do this and do this? It's, how can I help you? How can I serve you? Much like an influencer campaign, how can I help you build your brand? And in doing so, we're going to build each other together. It's all tides lift all boats. So that's really the idea behind it. The impetus behind building a community is let's build it and grow it together.
I love that, man. As you said all that, I think of diminishing returns and compounding returns, right? Like this idea of like, if you take money, or you take trust, or you take, whatever you're going to take, and you bury it underneath your bed, it's a diminishing return, right? Like, whereas if you invested in people, it becomes this compounding asset, right? Like if you're trusting people, they're going to trust you back. And, like it kind of goes that way, the same as investing. Let's talk about intimacy and vulnerability, right? This like into me, you see, I find that to be a really fascinating insight. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like what does that look like in companies, or how is that executed on, like that you've seen out there?
Not very well. That's what I would say to that. Not very well. I think people hold their cards close, and now more than ever, maybe we'll see a difference now that, people are working a little bit more remote. And so we're starting to be a little more transparent. Like the guy that was on video during the at the very beginning of the pandemic with his kid behind him on CNN, and I think he was I forget what network it was, and he rolled right into the background while the newscast was going. I thought that was as real as you can get. You cannot get more real than life happening behind you in the middle of a broadcast on a major network. And stuff happens, man. Stuff happens on Zoom. Now, what have we all seen? I mean, we've all seen everything, right? Like that and it warms our hearts. Like we're like, I mean, to an extent, it's like, that's real life. That's what actually happens. And so when we see more of that, more of the real life stuff that's going on, it really creates that. And I never really knew that. I never really honored it up until I think when I was seeing a movie when I was dating my wife, girlfriend, now wife, as of 24 years ago. This dates me, but Meet the Parents came out with Gaylord Fokker, the character who was Ben Stiller. And we sat there and we watched the movie. This was one of our first dates, or not first dates. It was a year in, and we came out of the movie, and I hadn't thought the movie was that funny, ironically, and she did. She was busting a gut, and she came out and she goes, "How could you not find that funny?" I said, "Because that's my life. Everything in that movie has happened. Most everything has happened to me." And she's like, "You know what? You need to embrace your inner Gaylord Fokker more." And I'm like, "You're so right." So the rest of my life, I'm like, and she said it like, "If you want to get married to me, you better embrace it." So I was like, I definitely need to embrace this more. So I think that that's the key to connecting more with others, is embracing your inner Gaylord Fokker and letting it out.
It's just a game, Fokker, right?
It's a game.
Just, yeah, man, that story. So I think of two things with that story. Number one is when The Office first came out, I was like 25 years old, managing like a 120 person division of a Fortune 500 company. And I'm like, this Steve Carell character is me right now. And it makes me very uncomfortable, right? But the older I get, the more I realize that self-deprecation, right? Like this idea of just like embracing your flaws and leaning into it is one of the all-time relationship builders. I think it's Brene Brown that talks about how vulnerability is at the base of building trust and building human connection, which really resonates, right? That feels like something that when we, at least personally, I've been able to embrace that so much more as I age. And when I'm younger, stakes felt way higher and whatnot. Do you think that has something to do with like the maturity of the internet and public information and all that stuff kind of landing on us, right? Like companies haven't been in this. If we were to relate it to like me in my 20s, companies have only had social media for like 20 years, right? Do you think that that's something that we'll kind of like culturally age into?
Yes. Yeah, I think that it's gonna happen more and more. And I think that it's gonna take leadership to show what it looks like. It's going to happen organically, and they have to realize that what they're saying and doing is going to have an impact. Now, ironically, Southwest is a great example, because the first CEO, the guy that started Southwest, would go down at the end of the day and he'd take a 6-pack of beer and sit there with the guys working on the planes, and he would just swap stories in real life, and they would be vulnerable with each other about what's just going on in their lives. And that's how he actually built the company, and in understanding what was actually going on behind the scenes and who these people were that were helping to build the company, and what kinds of things were they facing, and how can we create more of it. So is it being publicly transparent? No, it doesn't have to be. It can also be internally transparent, and how we grow in a human to human way. So that's a large part of it, is showing up as your, it's cliche, but showing up as your true self, and also seeing others for their selves and sharing that, deepening the relationships.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That reminds me of my buddy and my business coach, Jerry McNamara, who's like, you have to manage the whole person, right? Like nobody comes to work as a part of themselves. They're bringing it all to themselves. And, knowing the whole person allows you to be able to do that. Let's tap into then transparency and credibility and consistency. I almost feel like some of the things that we've discussed earlier, right? Like this idea of, do they ever compete with each other, right? Like if I'm going to be fully transparent and one day I feel like, hey, this is the direction of my company. And the next day I think, you know what, it might not be the direction of my company. Maybe it's that, kind of like this whole like Elon thing that's going on. One could argue that is ultra transparent because he's tweeting whatever he's thinking, right? Similar to some other elected officials. But like, that definitely deters in credibility if you can't be consistent and you can't become reliable. Have you thought about what the fine line is there? Like, how does somebody integrate those three values?
Yeah, actually I posted about this earlier today, ironically on Instagram, and we all call those boundaries. We have to have boundaries to live life, and we have to know what those boundaries are. And once you know them, paint within them, paint across the board within them, but know what your boundaries are. And as far as I can tell, it feels like there is no boundary on his tweets. It's like, everything goes. So that's where I start to lose trust, because I want to work with somebody who has boundaries. I want to trust them because they have boundaries and I have boundaries, and we can't cross those because that's part of who we are. That's the social contract that you opened up with, and we have to have that social contract with each other. So having a clear boundary, or at least appearing to have that boundary so that others know to grow with you and learn more about them, is going to help everyone over time.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Back to the Brené Brown thing, this idea of boundaries, she explains it really well as this, she talks about the boundary as like the perfect point where you can love yourself equally as much as you can love the other person, right? So it's like finding that boundary of, hey, you got to be true to yourself, but you also need to know the line when you are starting to be an asshole to others, if you're prioritizing yourself or whatnot. I think that's really well said. I would say a boundary is the perfect way to manage that transparency, consistency, reliability. I want to talk about what we talked about in the headline, right? AI, right? Trust is an endemic problem with society right now. And yet we're moving into this world where AI is dominating the conversation. It's coming at a million miles a minute. I get the feeling that you don't think it's about avoiding AI. There's got to be a better way to like incorporate this stuff, right?
When you say incorporate, you're talking about how we adopt it?
Yeah. How do we live in a world with AI and still need to build trust from your perspective?
Okay, so I think that it's always going to challenge us on a lot of times. I think when people who don't understand it, we go to the dark side, and the dark side is that Terminator, or people are taking over. And so I think that when we go to the dark side, there's some realism there. We want to be careful. We want to paint what the lines are, and again, know the boundaries, those kinds of boundaries. So here's the thing. It is never going to be humans versus technology. It's always going to be humans and technology working together to create deeper relationships. And in the way of AI, it's to create deeper relationships faster. Now, AI can bring us closer together faster. But as soon as we start using AI to replace relationships, that's where we've gone off the tracks. That's where we need to reel it back in. And I think that those are the conversations that we're having right now about what does this all mean? And it's just a big black hole right now. But I think eventually to come back around, just like I think bell bottoms are back, everything else is reciprocal. All things in life are reciprocal, and relationships will always bounce back and come into light as being the full spotlight of what this all means, of why we're doing this. So right now it's a gold rush. How many companies can they come out with a new AI tool every day? I'm spotting at least 5 to 10. I've played with over 100 of them. And that's just in the last 4 weeks. So that's a lot of companies. And in the next year, we're planning to build, I think I read $2.6 billion in spending in AI. So we're nowhere near what's about to come. And at the end of the day, we're all questioning, what does this mean? Well, it means what we define, and we have to define it to be in the light side versus the dark side. And if we're staying in a narrow niche of what our impact is for the company, remember I talked about impact. So what is the impact we want from our company, and what is the narrow niche that we're willing to solve for? So with my AI tool, I want to solve for, let's say, scheduling, because I know scheduling is a problem. Well, solve for that and stay within those guidelines or those boundaries. Whatever you're solving for, stay within that and stay on the light side, as long as you solve for that one thing. But I've seen AI companies not really defined in terms of what they do. They're just plugging in GPT and saying, let's create something and let everyone just ask the questions that they want to ask. What are you solving for? And that's the biggest thing. So I think that's the difference, is just really defining what you want the impact to be and then solving for that.
I love it, man. I feel like there's all these like enduring, tried and true values and everything that you're talking about that permeates all of it, right? It's like understanding what the outcome you want to create is, right? Like what the mission is, what we're all working towards, understanding what the rules of the game are, aka core values, what we can all agree on, what the boundary is, and then prioritizing the human relationship. And is it forming a human relationship or not, right? Like instead of just automating things for the sake of automating things. I think like these like 5 things that you've said: transparency, credibility, consistency, reliability, intimacy, vulnerability, and like self-trust can all kind of be applied to this application of AI. Like if you are letting the AI come up with your corporate strategy, that's not in line with this thing, right? That's not going to lead to consistency and credibility. Whereas if you're allowing for the AI to say, I've got this like vision for a tool where we already take all of our Zoom calls and put them into script, and it goes text to, it transcribes everything, and we're able to edit things because of that. I would love an AI tool that takes that, updates that transcription sorted by topic or whatever in my CRM in accordance to the person. And then on top of that, searches the last 3 months of conversations I've had and is able to analyze, oh, you just had this like awesome conversation with Bryan about trust. You talked to Kim about it 2 weeks ago. Do you want to send Kim this like video snippet of what Bryan is working on with trust? Maybe you can introduce them, or vice versa, right? Or like Kim doesn't like video messages, she likes audio messages, send her the audio, right? Like that idea of using AI to organize yourself better and be more efficient at building relationships, to me sounds really, really attractive, versus, how much noise can you make in the ecosystem?
Yeah. And we all love noise, don't we?
No. What tools have you, if you've been down this rabbit hole, right? Like if you've experimented with all these, like what do you find yourself using it the most for? You said scheduling, anything else? Any kind of like tools to recommend that you're
Yeah, well, I'm interviewing for my next book, and I'm doing a ton of interviews right now. So, which I know it'll surprise everybody that it's on, I think I said this before, it's on trust. And what I use it for, I've been using Otter to record the transcript of the interviews. And then I throw the transcript into, I'm using a Jasper, but you could use anything, and a Chat GPT or whatever. And I throw it in there and I ask it questions, and I say, what are the themes? What are the highlights? Write me an outline. And it's way faster than anything I could do. So, it just makes my life that much easier. When I first wrote my first 2 books, I was the guy going in there doing that kind of stuff and taking it all and parsing it out and creating, what it was going to be. Now I still have to write the book, but it just creates a much easier flow for me to pull things and put it together. So it'll probably cut my time quite a bit.
Totally, man. That's exactly where I'm living too, man. I'm taking transcripts of our shows, putting them in there and saying, hey, pick out the best stuff out of this thing. What are the best clips that we can go look for here? I'm also using it for, promoting shows. I have this like one prompt that's like, hey, I'm going to have Bryan Kramer on, who's a world-renowned trust expert, to talk about how to navigate trust in a world with AI. I want to invite people to a webinar about it, but instead of a webinar, call it a show, write it from a contrarian perspective, start it with an engaging opener, then build credibility on what he's done based on the books that he's written, and then give me 5 bullet points of what people are going to learn, and then have a compelling call to action of why to show up live. And it'll do that, and then I'll just edit it for a while. That used to take me like 25 minutes to think of all that. Now it just gives it to me like 6 minutes later. I edit it a bit and it works. I love the inputting of content you've created to then create the next draft of it is where I find a ton of value, man. Really cool. So you're using it for writing. That's awesome. Bryan, what have I not asked you about, man? Is there anything that you'd like to promote right now? How do people find you? All that good stuff.
No, I'll just say that the best way to find me is at bryankramer.com, Bryan with a Y, Kramer with a K. And in true human to human style, if you sign up for my newsletter, I reply back. If you hit the reply button and something strikes you, hit reply and let me know, and I'll hit reply. And before you know, we're having a real conversation. So that's where you can find me, and all my socials there, all of my books and everything else.
Go figure, man. Go figure that you replied to all your stuff yourself as the H2H guy. Bryan, man, I just really appreciate you doing this. You can hang around for the open mic session, but before you go, I find so much value in seeing your story, right? And in seeing how ahead of all of this stuff, those of us that have been prioritizing relationships and intuitively knowing that there's value in it and trying to figure out how to make a name for ourselves with it, I find that your story is very inspiring, right? Like I feel like the stuff that you're on right now, everybody's kind of on it now for better or worse. So it might dilute it a bit, but there's many of us that have been on this kick for 8-9 years or longer, and seeing your kind of like storyline of successful entrepreneur having this aha moment, getting a moment that works, and being able to like really just champion a message and evangelize this stuff. It's really inspiring to me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to get to like talk to you personally and have you on the show, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you.